The first time they laughed at her, she didn't say a word. She just adjusted the scope, breathed slow, and placed her finger gently against the trigger. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Have you ever been underestimated? Looked at like you were invisible, just because you didn't fit their image of power? Have you ever been told to step aside in a moment you knew you were born for? What would you do if the only thing between you and respect was one shot? Sarah Kent didn't come to the range to prove anything to anyone. She came to find a little peace. Wearing a faded military jacket over a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a practical braid, she looked nothing like the stereotype of a competition shooter. No flashy gear, no entourage. Just her, a weathered case of equipment, and 3 military canines calmly at her side, each dog wearing a quiet alertness that mirrored her own. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't need to. She wasn't there to impress. But the moment she stepped onto the private firing line, cleared by membership but not by permission, whispers started flying behind her back like wind over dry leaves. Is she lost? Where's her husband? Those dogs allowed out here? She's going to take that old bolt action to the 500-yard line. She should probably step aside. But Sarah had learned long ago how to tune out noise. The battlefield had trained her that silence wasn't weakness, it was control. The range was part of an HOA-owned complex on the edge of her quiet town. Newly constructed with all the glitz and intimidation of high-dollar gear and flashy members who carried more ego than discipline, it was designed for a specific type of shooter. And it wasn't her. Sarah had inherited a small property just outside the HOA's perimeter after her husband, Sergeant Daniel Kent, was killed during his final tour. He died saving 3 men, shielding them from an ambush he sensed too late for himself. The government sent flags, folded letters, and enough silence to drown her in grief. She moved away from everything after that, settling near the mountains, rebuilding her life in quiet steps, training dogs, volunteering, and keeping to herself. She wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble seemed to find her in the form of the Homeowners Association. They tried everything: letters, noise complaints, and routine inspections. At first, Sarah thought it was just overreach. But over time, she saw the pattern. It wasn't her dogs, it wasn't her property. It was her. She didn't look like the others, didn't play their social games, didn't cave when they threatened her with obscure zoning codes. And so, the power-hungry president of the HOA, Cynthia James, decided she needed to be managed. But Sarah hadn't survived war zones just to be bullied by a board with clipboards. That morning she came to the range not to fight, but to focus. She brought a rifle she and her late husband had custom-built during their last Christmas together. Matte black, precision-chambered, reinforced glass optic, every part etched with memories of laughter, firelight, and quiet moments shared between missions. As she set up, a junior range officer walked over, chewing gum like he owned the place. His mirrored sunglasses caught the light as he looked her up and down. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am?" She kept adjusting her stand. "Last I checked, this bay was open." He snorted. "It's usually reserved for long-range members. You know, experienced shooters." Her eyes didn't flicker. "That's fine. I've hit farther targets than this in worse conditions." Behind her, 2 HOA board members whispered something and chuckled. The tension was thick. But Sarah had seen thicker. She ignored them, focused on the scope, aligned her breath with the wind. Her canines, Axel, Remy, and Tango, sat silently behind the bench, eyes scanning, posture disciplined. They were trained not just for combat, but for therapy. They had walked her through nightmares and stood guard during her darkest hours. They knew what this meant to her. She looked down the range, 500 yards. Beyond the hill, the HOA clubhouse loomed like a fortress. There was a time she would have avoided being seen here, but not anymore. Then came the voice. "Excuse me." Cynthia James. Perfectly pressed suit, designer sunglasses. Clipboard clutched like a judge's gavel. "I'm afraid we need to review your registration," Cynthia said, feigning politeness. "There have been concerns about dogs, property violations, and now this. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, but it may be best for everyone if—" Sarah didn't let her finish. "I'm within my rights," she said calmly, not even turning. "The dogs are registered service animals under federal law. My property is legally compliant, and this range is a public access facility under the HOA charter." Cynthia stiffened. "There's a process to dispute any issues," Sarah continued, "but harassing me at a firing line isn't one of them." The surrounding murmurs fell into silence. A few range members paused mid-load. Cynthia's mouth opened, then closed. She turned without another word. Sarah exhaled once, then pulled the bolt open, chambered around, settled in. Her target stood at the far end, no bigger than a coffee mug from her perspective. Wind, 2 knots from the west, slight uphill gradient, sun-high optic clear. She whispered something under her breath, a name. Then the slow pull of the trigger. Boom! The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. Half a second later, the monitor at the target post exploded. Gasps echoed across the line. The range safety officer ran up, radio in hand. What just happened?" Someone checked the downrange camera. The bullet had pierced directly through the reinforced casing of the electronic scoring system. A 1 in 1,000 shot that had never happened before. Not just a bullseye. A dead center impact that had shattered the digital monitor behind. Its silence gripped the range. Then someone whispered, "She just broke the record." Someone else murmured, "That's not luck, that's a sniper." Sarah stood slowly, pulled the bolt back, ejected the casing, collected it like a keepsake. She didn't smile, didn't boast, but as she turned, her eyes locked with Cynthia's across the lot. The HOA president looked like she'd seen a ghost. Sarah walked past her, dogs at her side without a word. Her silence was louder than any victory speech. Behind her, one of the bystanders muttered, "She doesn't need to prove anything, not to us." Another said they tried to push her out, and she just rewrote the range's record. But Sarah wasn't listening. Her mind was already calculating the next step. If they thought this was the end, they were wrong. They had just seen the first warning shot. Have you ever stood on the edge of a storm, knowing full well you'd walk straight into it for what's right? Have you ever realized that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the ability to stand in the fire and not burn? This wasn't just about a gun range, or a woman with dogs. This was about something bigger, and Sarah Kent was just getting started. The next morning, the smell of wet cedar drifted through Sarah's cabin as dew still clung to the grass. Her dogs, Valor, Scout, and Delta, were already alert, pacing near the windows, not out of fear, but instinct. Something was off. The previous day's encounter at the range had replayed in her mind all night. The arrogance in Ronnie's voice, the way Cynthia stood by silently, and that deliberate step aside. It wasn't just casual disrespect. It was something deeper, something systemic. She'd learned in the military that disrespect wasn't random. It was strategic, a test of boundaries, a probe to see if you'd flinch. And if you flinched once, they'd come for more. Sarah didn't flinch, but she also didn't take threats lightly. Later that morning, she drove into town, her truck still caked in a dusting of red clay from the unpaved roads surrounding her property. The local hardware store wasn't just a place for screws and bolts. It was where the real talk happened. Men nursing coffee with weathered hands, women trading stories louder than the radio. Sarah stepped in, not to make a scene, but to listen. Did you hear about the range yesterday? Someone asked behind the seed display. Ronnie shut down the lanes early, said some troublemaker messed with the electronics. Cynthia probably told him to, another voice replied. Ever since she took over the HOA and pushed the town to restructure the range policies, it's been a mess. Sarah's ears perked up. So the range was connected to the HOA. Of course it was. She quietly picked up a bag of dog feed, nodding to the clerk, then headed out. She didn't need to ask questions just yet. People spoke more freely when they didn't know. They were being heard. But now it was clear. The confrontation at the range wasn't just about her. It was about control. Cynthia and her HOA had their fingers wrapped around more than just property lines, and they were determined to tighten their grip. Back home, Sarah set the bag down on the porch and grabbed her notebook. Military training had taught her that information wins wars. Before you engage, you recon. Understand your enemy. Uncover the ground beneath their boots. She began digging. Property records, town hall transcripts, public meeting videos. A pattern emerged. Over the past 18 months, the HOA, under Cynthia's leadership, had expanded its reach into areas no HOA had any business controlling. The shooting range, the local campground, and even permits for backcountry hiking access. All under the guise of community safety and regulation. But the regulations weren't about safety. They were about restriction. Fees for unauthorized shooting lane use, permits required for dog training in public spaces, fines levied against unregistered utility trailers even parked on private land. Residents weren't resisting because they feared retribution, or worse, legal retaliation. Sarah flipped the page of her notebook and jotted a single line. This isn't a community. It's a quiet occupation. The sun began to dip low by the time she reached out to her first neighbor. Jackie, this is Sarah Kent. You don't know me well, but I heard you used to take your boys out to the range on weekends. There was a pause on the line. Used to, Jackie replied. Not anymore. They banned youth practice sessions unless you pay a $500 insurance bond. And I can't afford that, not after the fence fine they threw at me last month. Sarah's voice softened. You ever try to fight it? Another pause. You can't fight a machine like that, not alone. Sarah smiled faintly. What if you weren't alone? Over the next few days, Sarah quietly reached out to others. Some were hesitant at first, afraid to speak out. But Sarah's calm, confidence paired with her military past and sincerity began to draw them in. Mason, a disabled vet who had stopped shooting after Ronnie called him a liability. Lorraine, an elderly woman fined for leaving birdseed on her lawn, wildlife encouragement. The citation read. Even Jerry, the town's old range instructor, who'd mysteriously disappeared from his job when Cynthia took over. Sarah met them one by one, listening more than she spoke. But she took notes, patterns, names, dates, all of it. By the end of the week, her notebook was filled with stories, but more importantly, proof. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were weaponizing them. Then came the cameras. One morning, as she walked Scout near her property line, Sarah spotted it. Mounted low in the brush, a motion sensor camera angled toward her fence. A shiny new model, definitely not local issue. She yanked it out of the ground and took it inside. No markings, no registration number, just a SIM card and a solar panel attachment. This was surveillance, on private land. The line had been crossed, but Sarah didn't react. She recorded everything, took photos, logged the coordinates. Then she made her first real move. That afternoon, she visited a county clerk's office, pulled every public document on HOA budgets and expenditures over the last 2 years. What she found was subtle, but damning. Line items listed as security enhancements totaling over $120,000. No vendor names, no camera logs, no installation records. And strangely, all approvals were signed off by just 2 people. Cynthia, James, and treasurer Ronnie Hale. Sarah copied every document, photographed every line, then took them home. That night, she sat on her back porch under the stars. Her dogs lay quietly around her, heads resting on their paws. She sipped black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, eyes scanning her notebook under the amber light of an old lantern. She didn't want a war. She wanted peace. But peace was never achieved by silence. Peace came from pressure, from action. The next morning, she returned to the range, this time not to shoot but to observe. Ronnie saw her walk in and immediately tensed. Back again? He asked, arms crossed. Sarah gave him a flat smile. Just watching today, making sure the community is safe, right? She walked the perimeter, noting 2 more newly placed security cameras. A few young men who looked more like rent-a-cops than shooters hovered near the lane gates. They wore patches with no agency name, just the word enforcer. It was laughable and dangerous. Back in her truck, she uploaded her collected footage to a secure drive. This wasn't just intimidation, it was militarization. Then she made her final round of calls. She contacted a lawyer, her old JAG contact now practicing civilian law, and briefed him on what she'd found. She also looped in a civil rights group that handled HOA abuse cases. She didn't reveal everything yet, but made it clear that what was happening here wasn't just unethical, it was potentially criminal. As the sun set that evening, Sarah gathered her neighbors, Jackie, Mason, Lorraine, Jerry, and a half-dozen others on her property for a quiet meeting under the cover of dusk. She laid it out for them. This isn't about dogs or fences or even shooting range rules, she told them, her voice calm but resolute. This is about power being misused. It's about fear controlling people who should be free. And it ends now. She passed around copies of the budget logs, the camera photos, the legal summaries. The neighbors looked at each other. For the first time in a long time, there was more than fear in their eyes, there was hope. What do we do next? Mason asked, his voice rough from years of silence. Sarah stood tall, arms crossed as Delta padded up beside her. We do what they never expected us to, she said. We fight back, not with noise, not with threats, but with truth, strategy, and unity. Then she nodded once, slow and deliberate. And when the time come, we make our shot count. 3 days later, the local shooting range was busier than usual. A town-wide marksmanship tournament was underway, funded, advertised, and organized by the very HOA Sarah had been investigating. Ronnie, in a crisply ironed polo shirt with the HOA crest embroidered on the chest, strutted along the sidelines like a general inspecting his troops. Cynthia stood near the judge's tent, sipping cucumber water and smiling her politician's smile for the local paper. It was a showcase event, a PR stunt, something to paint the HOA as community-minded and inclusive. But Sarah had other plans. She stood behind the registration booth in plain jeans and a slate-gray jacket, her hair tied back in a simple braid, dog tags tucked beneath her shirt. Mason sat beside her, pretending to tally scores on an old clipboard. Jerry was nearby, blending in as an idle spectator. Lorraine worked the food stand. Fresh lemonade, homemade cookies, and a few quiet observations passed between neighbors she knew would listen. All around them, community members who once felt voiceless were now alert, watching, waiting, because this wasn't just another tournament, this was Sarah's battleground. Who let her in? Cynthia asked, stepping back when she spotted Sarah leaning on the barricade rail. She's not registered, she's not a member. I'm not, Sarah replied calmly. But it's a public event. Isn't that what the flyers said? Cynthia scoffed. This event is for HOA-supported members and guests. Sarah pulled out a laminated document and handed it over without flinching. Actually, according to the local firearms range use agreement filed with the county in 2018, this land is held in a public trust, meaning no private entity, including your HOA, can restrict participation in open competitions. Ronnie stalked over, grabbing the paper. His smug grin faltered as his eyes darted over the legal codes. This doesn't concern you, he muttered. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's the part you keep getting wrong, Ronnie. It does concern me, and every single person your HOA has, fined, banned, bullied, or surveilled. At that, a few heads turned. A subtle shift in energy rippled through the crowd. Cynthia stepped forward, trying to retake control. You're here to make a scene. Typical of someone who thrives on drama. Sarah chuckled. I'm not here to make a scene, I'm here to make a point. She turned to the small crowd gathering near the registration area. Last week I was told to step aside because I didn't look the part, because I didn't belong. But I've served this country for over 2 decades. I've trained Navy SEALs, snipers, and K-9 units in 3 war zones. And I don't need anyone's permission to be here. Ronnie laughed, but it was thin, nervous. A war story doesn't make you a marksman. Sarah glanced at him. You're right, which is why I signed up. He blinked. What? I'm entering the open category, she said, lifting her duffel. You said it yourself. It's open to guests. Ronnie hesitated, glancing at Cynthia. She can't. Cynthia's whisper cut through his stammering. Let her compete. We'll humiliate her, publicly. End this nonsense. Ronnie grinned again, a sharp glint of cruelty returning to his eyes. Fine, he said. Let's see what you've got. The tournament was structured as a 5-stage precision challenge. Stationary target accuracy, moving target tracking, long-distance calibration, speed engagement, and finally, custom skills exhibition. Sarah moved through the first 2 stages with calm, unshakable control. Not flashy, just precise. Her body language was relaxed, her breathing even. She didn't speak, didn't taunt. She just executed. Ronnie watched from the monitor tent, arms folded, his jaw tightening as her scores kept landing in the high percentile. Stage 3, long distance. Sarah approached the 800-yard mark and lay prone on the gravel mat. She adjusted the custom bipod, aligned her scope, and took a breath so deep it stilled the air around her. Boom. The target light flashed green. Then again, and again. 3 hits. Center mass. Minimal drift. Less than a 1.5-inch variance over 800 yards. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's military level. Did you see that grouping? She's not missing. At all. Ronnie's lip curled. Rigged. Must have brought a tuned scope. This is a show. But his hands were shaking. Then came stage 5, the skills exhibition. It was traditionally designed for flash, hitting a moving soda can, shaving the stem off a watermelon, slicing playing cards edge on. The last act was a speed and control. Test 5 targets at 5 distances in 15 seconds. Miss 1 and the entire score dropped to 0. Next shooter, called the judge, his voice slightly uncertain. Sarah stepped forward. Someone in the crowd murmured, "That's the one they tried to kick out." Silence fell. Sarah didn't showboat. She simply removed her jacket, revealing a dark green t-shirt with a faded unit insignia on the sleeve. Her arms were lean, weathered, trained. She adjusted her gloves, took her stance. Shooter ready? She nodded once. Beep. 5 shots cracked through the air like distant thunder. The monitor sputtered, then went completely black. Smoke curled upward from the last steel target's mount. The final round had ricocheted into the sensor casing and fried the internal display. For a moment, the entire range fell dead silent. Then came the roar. People rushed forward, not in panic, but in awe. The monitor's central node had been destroyed by sheer precision. Is that even possible? Someone whispered. She split the sensor casing. Dead center. Cynthia stormed over, face flushed red. This is sabotage. She destroyed HOA. Property? Sarah didn't blink. According to the county, this isn't HOA property. And that was a clean shot, witnessed by 2 certified judges. Ronnie tried to step in, but the chief range officer cut him off. Her score stands. And we'll need to speak with the HOA about tampering with public equipment, by the way. This monitor was due for inspection last month. Why wasn't it logged? A murmur spread again, this time with teeth. Sarah turned toward the crowd. This isn't about me. It's about people being pushed out of places they helped build, fined for walking their dogs, watched by hidden cameras, forced into silence. She pulled a binder from her duffel. These are expense records, surveillance maps, signed checks to shell companies run out of Cynthia's husband's LLC. All public, all filed. Gasps, murmurs turned into shouts. Ronnie stepped back, suddenly looking much smaller. Security, Cynthia barked, spinning toward the hired guards. But none moved. They weren't HOA. They were local, and many had family in the crowd. Sarah handed the binder to a man wearing a county inspector badge. Already filed with the state attorney's office, she said. And the Civil Liberties Foundation. I'd suggest preparing a statement. Cynthia's mouth opened, then closed. She turned on her heel and stormed off, shoving past two reporters now jogging toward the scene. Ronnie lingered for a beat longer before backing away. Sarah exhaled slowly. The battle wasn't over. But the tide had shifted. She felt a hand on her shoulder, Jackie eyes wide with pride. "You did it." "No," Sarah replied. "We did it." 3 weeks later, the HOA office was silent. Where there was once a constant churn of policy memos, dues enforcement, and drone surveillance logs, there were now cardboard boxes, unplugged monitors, and a handwritten sign taped to the locked glass door. "Closed pending internal review. By order of the County Ethics Board." Sarah stood across the street beside Lorraine, sipping coffee from a chipped thermos. The sun hadn't quite climbed over the tree line yet, but the air held the weight of something cleansed. "Never thought I'd see that place shut down," Lorraine said. "They'll open again," Sarah replied. "But not the same." She wasn't wrong. The fallout from the tournament had landed like a lightning strike. Sarah's binder, distributed to 3 media outlets, the county attorney, and a retired judge who happened to live 2 blocks from Ronnie, had detonated a firestorm. Financial audits revealed years of misappropriated dues, fraudulent fines, and security expenditures funneled into private accounts. Ronnie was named in 3 separate criminal complaints. Cynthia had resigned within 48 hours, citing mental fatigue. But the real shift didn't come from press releases or courtroom motions. It came from the neighborhood itself. For the first time in years, residents showed up to the open meetings. Dozens, then hundreds. They demanded transparency, reviewed bylaws, and voted to remove the HOA board entirely. A provisional leadership council was formed, half veterans, half longtime locals. Their first act? Dissolve the surveillance contracts. The second? Open the range to all members of the public again, free of HOA registration. By week's end, the old metal sign that once read "Private HOA Members Only" was pulled out of the ground and replaced with something simpler: Community Range. Welcome. Jerry now ran weekend safety courses. Mason volunteered with a youth marksmanship league, teaching kids respect for firearms, not fear. Lorraine started baking for local events again, without needing a permit or paying a $300 culinary activity fee. And Sarah declined every interview, every speaking request, every hero label. She simply returned to her morning walks, now with Jackie at her side. "I never got to thank you properly," Jackie said one morning, as they passed the old tool shed Ronnie once used as his private surveillance post. "You could have walked away. You didn't owe any of us anything." Sarah looked ahead, watching the rising sun cast long shadows over the worn gravel path. "I didn't do it for thanks," Jackie waited. "I did it because somewhere along the way people forgot what community means. They started replacing respect with rules. Cameras instead of conversation. Fines instead of forgiveness." She stopped walking. This place raised families, fed soldiers, buried veterans. And the moment someone said she doesn't belong here, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about every single person who's ever been told they're not enough because they don't look right, talk right, or fit the spreadsheet. Jackie swallowed hard. "You made us remember who we are." Sarah gave a soft smile. "That was always in you." I just kicked down the door. That weekend, the range held a community picnic. No entrance fees, no formalities, just folding chairs, grilled corn, and music from an old Bluetooth speaker propped on a stump. Halfway through, a girl no older than 10 walked up to Sarah with a folded piece of paper. "My grandpa said you used to be a soldier," she said. "I did," Sarah replied gently. "My mom said you beat the bad guys without hurting anybody." Sarah paused, then smiled. "Well, sometimes the best shot is the one that doesn't need to be taken." The girl nodded and handed her the paper. "I drew you. It was crayon. Messy. Beautiful. A woman in a green t-shirt aiming a rifle toward a giant monitor exploding with stars. But beneath it, in the child's handwriting, were 5 words. She made us feel safe. Sarah stared at it for a long time. Later, she pinned it on the inside of her garage, right above her tool bench. Not for display, for memory, for grounding. That same week, the state attorney issued indictments. Ronnie was arrested at a golf course in another county, trying to bribe a groundskeeper for fake employment records. Cynthia was nowhere to be found, though rumors swirled she'd fled to her sister's house in Florida. In the following months, the HOA was reduced to a basic maintenance cooperative. No dues hikes, no private surveillance, no unchecked power. The new board, voted in by over 90% of residents, included 3 single mothers, 2 veterans, and an 83-year-old retired librarian who'd once been fined $700 for a garden gnome. The town breathed again. The people started waving at each other again, and Sarah, she went back to her workshop, tinkering, building. She started teaching basic firearm mechanics at the high school one night a week, quietly, without fanfare. Not just guns, but respect, ethics, responsibility. One student asked her why she never smiled in photos. "I don't shoot for the camera," she said. "I shoot for the quiet." And quietly, she became the standard. If you asked about her at the range, people would just nod. That's Sarah. Don't mess with her. But if you're in trouble, she's the first one you want nearby. Months passed. Seasons changed. One evening, as the sun set behind the hill and the gravel shimmered gold, Sarah stood on the same firing line where she'd once obliterated a sensor. Jerry walked up beside her. "You know," he said, "we're naming this range after someone." Sarah raised an eyebrow. He nodded toward the new sign, half covered in a canvas drape. "It'll be revealed tomorrow." She exhaled slowly. "Don't." Jerry shrugged. "Too late. I didn't do this for that. We know. That's exactly why it's yours." She didn't argue, didn't say thank you. She just stood still, eyes on the horizon as the wind passed softly across the field. No applause, no spotlight, just peace. And in that moment it was enough.